Thank you so much for joining me today for the Right to Counsel National Consortium quarterly webinar. I am a little under the weather, and I've asked my colleague Genevieve Citron to please take over the webinar for me today, so you don't have to hear me cough throughout the webinar. So Genevieve, could you please begin?
Great, thank you, Preeti, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the first quarterly webinar of the Right to National Consortium. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide consortium members with updates, and so we'll have a couple people speaking each time, and then we'd like to open the floor so that people can join in and provide any information and any updates on what they're working on. So today we are very lucky to have two Johns with us today. And we have John Burkhout from the Louisiana Campaign for Equal Justice, who will be discussing an initiative dedicated to fair funding for Louisiana's public defenders. And we also have John Rapping of Gideon's Promise, who will talk about reclaiming our place in the criminal justice narrative and transforming the culture of indigent defense. We will then talk a little bit about our market research that's going to be conducted by Bell Busnell Strategist. And we will close with a social media update by Ivan Dominguez of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and then we will open up the floor for updates and questions. But before I turn it over to John Burkhout, I'd like to introduce Kim Ball, who most of you know. She is a Senior Policy Advisor for Adjudication at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Department of Justice. Kim works with national, state, and federal partners to ensure the fair administration of justice in criminal courts. In addition to her dedication to the Right to Counsel initiative, including her hard work on this national campaign in smart defense, she works on smart pretrial and smart prosecution, demonstrating the importance of focusing on all sectors of the justice system. Kim, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Genevieve. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to say hello and just talk about a few things that have gone on since we saw you all in November. I hope you all got the newsletter, the first newsletter of the Right to Counsel National Campaign. And if you have any ideas for us or want to see your initiative or things that you're doing in the newsletter, please send that to American University, Preeti and Genevieve. I know I closed the meeting in November talking about the Smart Defense sites. I just wanted to remind you of the sites. It's New York City, the state of Kentucky, the state of Washington, several counties, I think 15 counties in Texas doing a project, and Alameda County. We're very excited to have Smart Defense join DJA's Smart Suite and Smart Justice for the first time. It's an initiative that focuses on research and having a research partner from the beginning of the project. You can find out more about all of the sites and what we're doing at our new website. It's smartdefenseinitiative.org. And I tested earlier, if you just Google Smart Defense Initiative, it should be the third one that comes up. And you can link right to our website and find out all about the sites and where to get more information. Also wanted to remind you about where they are physically located. Because part of our goal is to coordinate resources and activities and what's going on among all of our partners and across the United States. So if you know of anyone in those jurisdictions, or if you know of any work that's going on, please reach out to the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association or to me, and we can help coordinate and hook all that up. I wanted to let you know that BJA is funding some defense initiatives this year. We will be announcing those in late summer, so stay tuned. We did not compete anything this year. It will all be supplemental funding. We do anticipate a new site or two with Smart Defense, and that will be announced later this summer. Also wanted to remind everyone on the phone that in the President's fiscal year 17 budget, for the third time, there is line item money for criminal defense, the right to counsel, and also civil legal aid. And the President puts those in his budget, but it is Congress that appropriates the money. So as you're out talking to people, specifically your U.S. representatives, please educate them on the need for this money. It would be very, very nice for us to get some dedicated money to defense. The only way we can do that is if Congress appropriates it. For the executive branch and the president, we're pulling our weight and we're getting it in that budget. But now it's up to people like you out in the field and that work with Congress, because I don't, to educate about the need and to get the money in the appropriations bill. And I'll close with telling you a story about a success I feel that we're already having with the Right to Counsel National Campaign. One of my goals has always been through this initiative to get the defense at the table and in the conversation. And so now everywhere I go, I talk about defense. Every criminal justice meeting I'm at, even if I'm there for community court or if I'm there for pretrial or procedural justice. And recently I was at a BJA meeting that had all the SMART justice programs present, which are very heavy with police and supervision. And everyone I met at that meeting, we had researchers, state funders. There was a big group. It was an academy to talk about research. And two people I talked to specifically. One was a researcher in Ohio, a police researcher, that had never thought about the role of defense as part of the bigger criminal justice reform. And I exchanged emails with him and have shared information. He's reached out to someone in Ohio. He's going to include a defense representative on his some of his focus group and policy meetings that he conducts. And so I feel that that's a big success. I also talked to a state funder from a large state that has worked with some of the BJA JAG formula money, and talked to him about the importance of defense. And he was very impressed that the Department of Justice was including defense in the SMART project. And he promised me to consider defense in funding and to think about it when scheduling meetings and looking at participant lists. So those were two successes that I wanted to highlight, because that's one of the purpose of our quarterly webinars. Encourage each of you to still, think about that and talk defense everywhere you go. And I look forward to hearing John and Ivan and Genevieve today on our agenda. So I'll turn it back over to Genevieve. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for being a wonderful supporter and an avid champion for the Right to Counsel, and for those encouraging examples of how we can really move this forward. So now I'd like to introduce John Burkhart, who is the campaign manager for the Louisiana Campaign for Equal Justice, which is an initiative dedicated to fair funding for Louisiana's public defenders. We spotlighted John Burkhart in the February newsletter, but we also wanted you to hear directly from John about his work. He is a new consortium member of this year, and we're really excited to have him join us. So with that, I will turn it over to you, John. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me all right? I assume I'll get some chats if that's not the case. But Genevieve, thanks for the introduction. Kim and Preeti, and thanks for everyone out there for being a part of this. My name is John Burkhart. I am the campaign manager, soon to be the executive director of the Louisiana Campaign for Equal Justice. We are dedicated to fair funding for Louisiana's public defense system. I imagine that most of you have heard the news lately, and it's all true. And the fact that the news is getting out there is in large part a compliment to some of the people that enabled me to be in the position that I am at. For a little bit of a background, I started almost 3 years ago. This was a grant-funded project from the Open Society Foundations to the Orleans Public Defenders. And the idea was that public defense funding in Louisiana is it's unstable, unreliable, and inadequate, and something had to be done. And it was an entire blank canvas. There was no real formula for how reform was supposed to be brought. There's no, there's no instruction manual when it comes to running a campaign like this. It was just, here's the situation, go out there and do what you can. And I've been very fortunate to have a lot of more experience, a lot of very bright people, and a lot of people that know the landscape to guide me. But in many respects, it was just kind of assembling the vehicle as we were traveling. Some of the challenges that we faced in the beginning, we like to use the Game of Thrones metaphor. Within the public defense community, it was very Game of Thronesy. There you had a state Louisiana Public Defender Board, and then you have 42 judicial districts. Each of them has a district defender. It wasn't as bad as it could be, and that's maybe because I'm always an optimist. But whenever you don't have enough resources and a lot of different stakeholders, it's a recipe for disaster. So there are members of what we call the field. So these are the district defenders in the field. There were many of them that did not trust the State Public Defender Board. There were maybe members of the State Public Defender Board that didn't quite believe in what was happening in the field. And then on top of that, I'm a grant-funded, I'm the recipient of a grant to the Orleans Public Defenders, and it's kind of like politics writ large, but in this case, whereas the rest of the nation doesn't trust Washington, D.C., a lot of Louisiana does not trust New Orleans. So there were considerable hurdles. And part of that tough sell that I had to do was to get out of New Orleans and drive to Natchitoches and Monroe and all the. I've probably been to about 60 of the 64 parishes, but that's just to understand what the local experiences was like for public defense, and not just the Orleans take on it, because like so many places. But yeah, like so many places, it's a state solution. It couldn't be done locally here in New Orleans. So it is about convincing the Louisiana legislature to step up and fund it. But so many of the legislators, the senators, representatives comes from parts, more rural parts. So it's having to understand, what their situation was, and was it the same thing as New Orleans? And another part about that tough sell is that I didn't really have much of an institutional backing, even though I had this grant funding. It wasn't like all of a sudden I showed up and said, "I'm here to fix everything." That I didn't have an immediate vote of confidence from people. I had to earn, I had to earn the right to be listened to by people, and I still feel like that continues to be my job, and that's both a challenge, but also really exciting, and like definitely keeps me motivated. And then obviously, I don't think there's anyone on this call that hasn't struggled one time or the other with the final point, and that's funding. My project was 15 months. That was how long I had, and in 15 months, you definitely can't assemble a coalition, and you can lay all the groundwork, but I only had that short mandate, and fortunately, we're able to get some buy-in from some key stakeholders. We're able to get a couple good research projects off the ground and get a good understanding of what was needed to be done, and we were able to get that 15-month grant renewed. We were able to, since then, we've been able to cobble together, grant after grant. We're not quite, not quite rolling in it, but I'm still employed 3 years later, and very grateful for it, and I think that's a tribute to a lot of people that have really come through for me. As for the work, this is my recipe for what to do. So it was hit the road and listen. So I'm a platinum member of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and that is because I just, every few weeks I would just go. Louisiana is very much a face-to-face state, so a lot of times you make a call, send an email, it wouldn't get answered, wouldn't get returned. So it was about showing up in all these jurisdictions and sitting down with district defenders, and it's having old fashions on a porch. It's going hunting. It's going fishing. It's going to dance recitals, attending movies, reading books with people, but just getting to know people, learning a bit more about the state, and especially about their district's needs. From all these conversations, it was really getting on the road that I first learned about a lot of the distrust that happens between the state board and the field. That wouldn't have happened if I stayed in an office in New Orleans. I had to get out there and drive the 300 miles for someone to trust me to tell me that. And then I had to, I had to honor that and be honest with people and say, I don't think that's possible, but, and then say, I will definitely keep that between us. So it was about building that trust, and that was especially about being in person and being in the room. And fortunately, from all that work, I was able to, get everyone's impression, all the district defenders, and then I could go back to them and say, here's what I learned. Here's what you all told me. And remarkably, people said, yeah, that sounds about right. And from there, I just got more and more buy-in. And then the district defender would, point me out to a local advocacy group. They would introduce me to their Kiwanis Club, their Rotary Club. They'd introduce me to their senator or other stakeholders, and we would then, it was almost like forming a new team in 42 different parts of the state. So that would not have come if I would have just written down my agenda, said, here's what I think is the best. It really did take getting out there, and if they don't buy in, then you don't have a solution. So that is how it started, and then we formed what we call a four-pronged approach to reform. And that's policy advocacy, outreach, and public education, media advocacy, and then constituent mobilization and organization. Policy advocacy is pretty, what we stand for is a stable, reliable funding mechanism for public defenders. We think that benefits that go to other stakeholders at the local level should go to your district defender. And we believe that also retirement, health benefits, and any other benefits should go towards your district defender, whereas now public defenders pay rent. So they're all relative. I think they're all quite anodyne solutions. I don't think there's anything terribly radical about it, but it took all that legwork to get the buy-in to believe in that. And fortunately, we've been able to get just about every district defender to sign on to what is our reform blueprint. It's a 20-page document that highlights what's wrong with public defense funding in Louisiana and what we believe the solution should be. And so we got that buy-in, and then a lot of that also results from research that I've done and that I've been able to have interns do, primarily looking at costs of what expenditures are for district defenders compared to district attorneys. And we are not about slinging mud or saying that other stakeholders earn too much or do this or do that. We're just trying to highlight the work that public defenders do in Louisiana and why we deserve and why the community deserves more funding for us. So that's what a lot of our research, a lot of what we did led into that, and then from there we took the show on the road, and that's outreach and public education. Again, a very personal state, a very face-to-face state. So that is driving out and speaking to Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, chambers of commerce. I just generally don't say no if someone's going to introduce me to a meeting. A lot of churches, and it's about presenting. I think we have a message that we might frame in a different way depending on the audience, but it's pretty universal. Universally applies to everyone in the state. So, that's the other part. Just get out there, and sometimes with the district defender, sometimes it's just me on my own. Third prong is media advocacy, and some of that, these are op-eds that I've written or done interviews with various media. And then another part is just building relationships with reporters so that, say, if you want to do a story on public defense, just reach out. I'll be happy to provide you with information or just a contact. And simply just building relationships of trust with them. And I think some of that's definitely shown through media pieces that we've had that maybe y'all haven't seen, but we've been able to get into media outlets in Alexandria and Shreveport and Monroe and some of the smaller cities that clearly the Washington Post and New York Times as well, but it's really about getting in front of everyone. And the last part is constituent mobilization and organization. We're still in, I'd say, the accruing phase, and that is still making new contacts, still getting out there and getting more newsletter subscriptions. We do envision the day when we will get people to either organize at the Capitol or call their legislators or coalesce in one form or another to advocate for reform. But we really believe that we have one shot at that, and we don't yet have the instrument before the legislature, which is another long story. But that we're building up towards that day, and hopefully that can coincide with a good instrument that will solve this crisis that we're in. what we've done is we've reached, with outreach, we've really looked at key constituencies, and a big part of this is saying that if we come up with the same group of people making the same arguments, we'll get the same results, and those results have not necessarily benefited the clients of public defense. So these constituencies are legal groups, and that's telling judges and district attorneys that, you know, we'll get better results, fewer appeals, and more efficient proceedings if public defense has stable, reliable, and adequate funding. The grassroots communities, these are civic organizations, but also a lot of churches, and this is maybe more why some of us are in the work, but highlighting the human element. What happens to someone who's innocent who gets caught in the system? What happens when the punishment is disproportionate to the crime? What happens to our communities when we have a lot of people cycling in and out of our prisons and then returning? It's no coincidence that Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and also has one of the highest rates of wrongful convictions, and also has an absolutely terrible crime problem. I think we've seen that this doesn't work, and a lot of that is because people, almost 90% of them in our criminal justice system are poor. They need an appointed attorney, and if they're not getting the right representation, the effects are felt in the rest of their life, but certainly by the rest of us. And then business groups, and this is where we're trying to diversify the groups that we reach to in our constituency. And business groups, you can think of it as like a fiscal conservative approach, and it costs a lot to incarcerate people. And it costs a lot when someone spends their life cycling in and out of our prisons, versus if they screw up, they go on probation, and then that person we believe that a lot of people that get caught in our system should be given the chance for redemption, and they can then go on to find jobs and be economically self-sufficient and be taxpayers rather than tax burdens behind bars. We, believe it or not, for what you might read about our economy, we actually have, in some places, an employment, a problem with not enough workers. So we try to stress to businesses that funding public defense can help identify who can work versus, who might need other punishment. And so we're trying to get them on board to strengthen our reach. This is an outlook provided by the State Public Defender Board. There's also the challenges that we face. This is an old map, but all these red districts are districts that are going insolvent, as in their public defense offices are basically going to be closed. This is an old map, so basically everything that's yellow is also red by this point. So what that leads to is it's terrible on the ground, but it is also a great opportunity for reform. I don't think, and many people will agree with me when they tell me that my job is impossible, but I don't believe that we'd really be able to achieve a great lasting reform if everything was working okay. I think it takes a moment of crisis to create a new opportunity. And part of that is I'd like to think that we're developing the policy angles and doing the outreach and constituent mobilization to be the carrots to entice legislators to make the right change and bring about stable, reliable, and adequate funding. And then the sticks, that comes from when those districts go insolvent, we're already seeing some litigation happening. So we're hoping that the bad cop approach of these lawsuits that are being filed by various organizations will then kind of talk some sense into the powers that be to provide better funding. And I guess this goes along with the funding challenges that it should say miles to go before I sleep. I'll throw my intern under the bus for that. But yeah, it's kind of odd. I'm more used to listening than I am to presenting, and it's great to be in front of this group right here. But I'm very well aware, and I'm the first one to say that we haven't achieved anything yet, because we're having layoffs, we're having people go unrepresented. And this is really, it's not the beginning of our work, but this is when we need to be working harder than ever. And it's an exciting time to be going around. It's very humbling to see how hard people have worked and what's happening, and especially to read in the newspaper and to see examples of clients. But this is why we do the work. This is why I do the work. And you know, I guess there'll be a question part later. But if you want to connect, my email is john@lcej.org. But that's our website. That's our Facebook and Twitter handle. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions, either I guess later on in this program or through personal correspondence. But I really appreciate this chance to speak. So thanks, y'all.
Great. Thank you so much, John. That was really, really an informative presentation, and we certainly can appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. I think actually at this time I'll take a brief break just to see if anyone has any questions or follow-up comments to John's presentation or anything that we've said thus far. So I think you can either use Q&A to submit a question, or if you'd like to speak, use the hand button on the bottom right, and Monica can unmute you. So I'm just going to pause to see if anyone wants to speak. Okay, so I think at this point, if something comes to you, please fill it in. Oh, we have one in right here. We just received a question that says, what has been your biggest challenge to date? John, if you can take that question.
Oh, yeah, all of the above. I'd say one, securing funding. Personally for this project, it has been difficult. I've been informed that I've been given 2 weeks notice a few times, and so that's been difficult to continue. But really, a lot of people tell you it's impossible. What you're angling for, you meet with probably seeing the way that the legislature can act, and just when you know the right solution, and seeing how others can be dismissive and being told no quite a bit has been the hardest part. But that's also kind of what gets me going. It's nice to, you know, have been persistently reaching out to someone for months or even years, and then to get that first meeting and to convince them. So every time I'm told no, it's just another chance to get back at them a little bit later and come back stronger. So I'd say to that.
Great. So if no one has any other questions, please feel free to submit questions along the way, and we can come back to them at the end if anything comes up. But with that, I'm going to pass it on to John Rapping. John is the founder of Gideon's Promise. He has been a very strong supporter of this initiative since the inception, and we are really grateful for that. He's a renowned criminal justice innovator and a 2014 MacArthur Foundation Genius Fellow who's dedicated his life to improving public defense. And we are really happy to have you here. So with that, John, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Preeti. And hopefully everyone can hear me. So as Preeti said, I am the president of Gideon's Promise, and we work with public defenders largely across the South, but increasingly across the country, not just to teach them to raise the standard of representation for their clients today, and not just to develop into tomorrow's indigent defense leaders, but also to collectively start to, I like to say, change a criminal justice narrative that frequently views poor people as less worthy of the kinds of rights we expect for our loved ones, and as a result frequently disrespects the lawyers who are tasked with representing those people. So I have to say, John, it's good to meet you online, because I do quite a bit of work with some of the folks you work with in Louisiana. We work with the offices in Lafayette, New Orleans, St. Tammany, New Iberia. I know you have your work cut out for you there. I also have to say thanks to this initiative, and particularly Kim Ball, who I think is frequently the one person running around the country making sure that she talks about public defenders whenever there is a criminal justice conversation going on. I think that Kim has committed herself to that, and I'm hoping that collectively through this initiative we can spark more people to do the same. So I really want to start off by sort of saying that I believe that over the last year and a half, the nation has really sort of finally awakened to a reality that I think many of us have realized, but we've been in a very small minority. And that reality is that equal justice in America is really illusory. It is really, justice is often determined by income, often determined by race. And I think that realization has struck us as a nation through a series of highly publicized and tragic encounters between police and citizens, encounters that have been taped, encounters that have gone viral, starting with, let's see if I can move this, did I move it? Nope. Nope. I'm trying to change the page and oh, here it is. So starting with up in the upper, my left-hand corner, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and then going on to Eric Garner in New York, 12-year-old Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio, Walter Scott in North Charleston, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and I'm actually in Baltimore today working with the public defenders here. That's Samuel DuBose out of Cincinnati, Sandra Bland in Texas. There was sort of a year of, it almost seemed like constant examples of African-American men and some women dying in the streets at the hands of a criminal justice system that seemed to not care equally about people. And I think communities started to raise their voice and say, we don't feel like part of the system. That these incidents have sort of continued more recently. We have had just this year a lot of talk about Laquan McDonald in Chicago, Jamar Clark in Minneapolis. Just within the last couple of weeks, 2 more shootings, Akil Denton outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and Gregory Gunn down in Montgomery, Alabama. And I think all of these really have awakened the nation to this reality. But what I frequently like to say is that for every person who dies in an encounter with a police officer, there are tens of thousands who are arrested. They are dumped into a criminal justice system where they have a public defender who may be heroic, who may be noble, but who is overwhelmed, beaten down, burned out, under-resourced, simply incapable of giving every client the representation our Constitution demands. And those people are processed through the system into prison cells. If they get out, many of them will not be able to return to their homes. They won't be able to return to their jobs. They won't be able to vote. They won't be able to get educational loans. So what I frequently like to say is it is this routine injustice that has not yet made the rounds on social media, that is wreaking far more havoc on our poorest communities than these tragic but relatively infrequent instances of more extreme abuses. And it's this routine injustice, I believe, that is only addressed when we fund and support public defenders. Public defenders speak for roughly 80% of the people in the criminal justice system. And the extent to which marginalized communities have a voice during this process of routine injustice all depends on our commitment to funding and supporting public defense. So I actually started my career in a relatively privileged public defender office. I started in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who know the D.C. Public Defender Service, it has been a model public defender office in the country, not because the lawyers are any better, but because it is relatively well-resourced. They have a mechanism to maintain manageable caseloads. I don't think that poor people in D.C. get more than the Constitution deserves. I think it's just that D.C. is one of the few offices that is able to provide every person what the Constitution demands. And I spent 10 years as a public defender in D.C., ultimately the training director, before leaving to move to Georgia to help with the effort to build a statewide public defender system in Georgia. 2 years after I came to Georgia, I went to New Orleans to help with the effort to rebuild that public defender office in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And when I first moved to the South, and I started studying indigent defense, the indigent defense crisis, I really found that people talked about the crisis, sort of the problems, in two categories. The first was financial. Clearly, we need more resources. And the second was structural. There's still, in many parts of this country, judges have a lot to say about who the public defenders are, either through directly appointing court-appointed counsel or having influence over the boards that hire public defenders. But frequently there are conflicts that public defenders face where they don't want to push too hard against the people who ultimately determine whether they're working tomorrow. And so there were financial and structural challenges that we frequently discussed. But what I found as I started working in Georgia and Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi was that there was a third challenge that wasn't talked about. And that challenge was culture. That the lack of funding, the crushing caseloads, the lack of respect for the position actually created a culture where we had come to accept a lower standard of justice for poor people. And I would meet these amazingly passionate young lawyers who would come into this work for all the right reasons, and within a short period of time, they had that passion beaten out of them, and they either quit or they became resigned to the status quo. This is one of my favorite paintings I just wanted to share with you. It's simply captioned "Indifference" by an artist named Frank Wu. And the message is really very simple. It's these robotic legs walking past a homeless veteran curled up in a fetal position. And the message is that all of us are bombarded every day by so much misery, so much poverty, so much injustice that it's simply human nature. It's a defense mechanism that we all have to sort of become sensitized to it, to walk past it. And I was reminded of this not long ago. I've got an 11-year-old daughter, and ever since she was about 5, she was the biggest homeless advocate I'd ever known, and she would break open her piggy bank in the morning and take her change and put it in a baggie to give to the homeless man on the off-ramp on the way to school. And one day we were walking down the street, and the man said to me, "Excuse me, sir, can you spare $1?" And I said, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't help you," and I kept walking. And I felt this tug on my sleeve, and I looked down, and it's my daughter. And she said, "Daddy," and I said, "Yeah, baby." She said, "Daddy, doesn't that man need $1 more than you?" And I thought to myself, of course he does. And then I thought, where did she learn this? And I thought, she learns that from me, she learns it from her mother, but all of us can forget the values we hold dearest, the very values we teach our own children, if we don't guard against indifference. It doesn't make us bad people. It makes us human beings in a really difficult world. And so I share this picture with you. At first blush, you might say, what does that have to do with public defenders? I think it has everything to do with public defenders. Because I work with public defenders across this country, and they go into courtrooms across this country. And in any courtroom in America, you can walk in and you will find lawyers who care, who came to this work for the right reasons. But they are subjected to such crushing caseloads and so much injustice that after a while they start to accept shortcuts. Maybe they don't file that motion that they think might get the judge mad. Or if they're overwhelmed, they'll take it out on their clients and maybe call them stupid or something like that. And it becomes a slippery slope before you start to become indifferent. And the end result of that process is illustrated in this video clip. And I've got to apologize because the volume is really low, so we're going to try it. Before you start it, though, let me just give a little background. And if the volume is too soft, we'll turn it off and I'll just summarize it for you. But you're about to see a man who was, he's elected by the other public defenders in Tennessee to be their spokesperson. He is the president of the Public Defender Committee in Tennessee, elected by all the other public defenders. He's been doing this for 30 years, and he is representing the public defenders at a budget hearing, and he's asked a very simple question. Do you have enough resources? And this is his answer, if we can play the video. Are we able to get the video?
Give me just 1 second, John. I'm
okay.
Trying to pull it up.
Sure.
blessed. And, you know, there is, I just say this, you know, y'all probably get up here and you always are, but my district, I think, assuming all this redistricting stuff, nothing happens, I think I have enough assistance because of the caseload that I have. I have a 5-county district. I have attorneys for each county. What I have done is converted one of my investigators attorney so I can cover all the courts. And I have one investigator for the district. In our caseload, we do about 4,000 cases a year. I have been blessed with retention of my staff. It means I have experience. Really helps a lot in being able to process cases, time saver in a lot of cases. I think more efficient. I think I have a great staff, great guy. I like to think I have a reputation that forward and forward get good quality. Of course, I'm right. But in the state right now, I think you have supplied what I
Preeti, that's good if you want to stop it. Or Genevieve? Okay. Can everyone hear me again?
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. So that video, I watched that and I think to myself, I mean, here's a man who says I have 5 offices or 5 courthouses that I cover, and I have 5 lawyers, and we closed last year 4,000 cases. That's 800 cases a lawyer. And he then goes on to say he's blessed. And he talks about how his lawyers are efficient, that they're good at processing people. And I think to myself, I'm sure that man did not come out of law school 30 years ago and say to himself, you know what I want to do with my life? I want to help process 800 people a year into prison cells. I think he was shaped by a system that has lost sight of justice. And I don't think he's any weaker or worse than any of us. It can happen to any of us if we don't guard against indifference. This book, if you haven't read it, I really recommend it, by Amy Bach, who is a journalist and a lawyer. And she went around the country examining criminal justice systems and came to the conclusion that injustice in courtrooms across this country has really become the norm, that it is ordinary, that ordinary injustice actually defines criminal justice in America. And she has an opening passage where she says, ordinary injustice occurs when a community of legal professionals have come to accept lapses in the system. They become so used to lapses in the system that they lose sight of their own role in perpetuating them. And I think that is a culture that has developed where frequently you can go into a courtroom and you will see people getting representation that we would not tolerate for our loved ones, but judges and prosecutors and defenders have come to accept it as the way things are done. And that is a culture that I think we need to change. So if you look at the gentleman from Tennessee, what I like to say is that we could give him all of the money in the world, and we could restructure his office. But given his mindset, given how his assumptions have been shaped by the system, he would probably leave at noon, right? Because he believes what he's doing is good work. And if we don't take on this challenge of culture, we will not really have meaningful indigent defense or criminal justice reform. In 1963, you all know that's Clarence Earl Gideon, the Supreme Court said in Gideon versus Wainwright that the lawyer is the vehicle necessary to ensure justice, that no layperson can maneuver a complicated system of law and procedure without a lawyer. And although the court didn't say it, because I think the court believed it was implicit, if we believe in equal justice, which is what Gideon versus Wainwright was all about, then what kind of lawyer are poor people entitled to? Well, they're entitled to the same kind of lawyer that folks with means would pay for. But yet 53 years later, we see that that's not at all the case. We have strayed so far from the promise of Gideon, and we've strayed from it to the point that I think this ad, which I'm going to ask you to start in a second, illustrates it. This is an advertisement run against a candidate for governor in South Carolina, actually attacking his credentials as a defense lawyer. So far from the ideal of Gideon, holding defense lawyers up as the heroes of the criminal justice system, the engines that drive justice, this is more along the lines of how we view the defense function today. If we could play this video.
Protect criminals, not us.
So with that image of the defense lawyer, it becomes very hard to rally support and resources for defense lawyers who don't just represent people accused of crimes, but represent the most vilified people accused of crimes, poor people. And that extends to popular culture. If you think about Law & Order, which is the longest running TV drama series to date, remember the intro to Law & Order. In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories. Dun dun, right? You all remember that. Literally, where are the public defenders? They are rendered irrelevant in today's criminal justice narrative. Not necessary in the process of from arrest to incarceration. And that really is what I think we are up against in this campaign. I am a huge fan of the Brennan Center for Justice. I think they're a great ally in this fight to reform criminal justice. Last year, they put out a document called Solutions. American Leaders Speak Out on Criminal Justice, and they invited 22 leaders across the country to opine on how we can fix our criminal justice system. And these 22 leaders included some current presidential candidates. They included Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, Marco Rubio, some of the biggest names in politics and criminal justice reform. 22 chapters, 164 pages. Once was the word public defender even written, and that was in a chapter by Joe Biden where it was sort of a throwaway, where he said he served in communities as a public defender and for 36 years as Delaware's senator. But literally no one thought to discuss public defenders as part of the solution to the criminal justice crisis. And again, it's not that these are folks who aren't as committed to criminal justice reform as we are. It's that unfortunately, without even realizing it, we have all embraced a narrative where public defenders simply are not nearly as important as they were envisioned 53 years ago in Gideon. And so I am thankful to this campaign because I think it is badly needed. And I think we need to think about how to talk about public defenders as a critical engine to criminal justice reform. We need to refine our messaging so that we can move people to understand that. And I think only by doing that will we have meaningful criminal justice reform. And so while I could speak for this on hours, I've already taken more time than I was allotted. I am going to wrap up here and just say thank you so much. It's great to be a part of this group.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for bringing the cultural aspect to light. That was really wonderful. So I know we are running short on time, but I do want to briefly pause here to see if anyone has any comments or questions for John at this time, because I also know that you have to run shortly. So if anyone has any comments or questions, please use the Q&A box or raise your hand, and we will call on you. All right, without further ado then, I guess I will keep going. So you ended talking about messaging, and that's a great segue into our marketing research update. The campaign has recently signed a subcontract with Belden Rusinello Strategists, BRS, and they're going to begin with conducting 6 focus groups, 2 in each city, and they are going to be held in Houston, Texas, Columbus, Ohio, and Richmond, Virginia. These focus groups will be held during the month of April, and we plan on presenting the findings in our next quarterly webinar. As part of this portion of the initiative as well, we are going to form a marketing research steering committee comprised of practitioners in the field from various criminal justice sectors to help us guide this process. Additionally, the focus group results will guide into opinion polling survey, which will also be conducted by BRS, and we'll use that to help us frame our larger messaging campaign. So if anyone has any questions on that, please feel free to raise your hand or submit a question via the Q&A. And I am also at this going to introduce Ivan Dominguez, who is the Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And prior to joining NACDL in 2008, he practiced law for over a decade in New York City. We are really excited that we have brought Ivan and his team on board to be part of our Right to Counsel social media strategy. They took over the outreach in January, and we have just been doing, getting a lot of really positive feedback in that regard, and we are just very excited to have them. So, Ivan, I will turn it over to you to take over.
Great. Hi, everyone. This is Ivan Dominguez. What terrific presentations this afternoon. I will make this brief. I know we've just crossed over the 3 o'clock point, but I do want to say that it's really an honor for me personally and professionally and for NACDL to be involved with this truly, truly important campaign and to work with Genevieve and Preeti and Caroline in the AU Justice Programs Office and with Kim at BJA. Also on the call is my colleague Ezra Dunkel-Polier, who, among many, many talents, is a Zen master of social media. If you are following the campaign on Twitter or Facebook, you will see how good he is at engagement on those platforms. And we are both, as a team, quite committed to the success of this project. What you see on the slide is the handle for Twitter for the campaign, which I would be ever so grateful if you would do everything that you can to share that handle and get people to follow it on Twitter. The same with Facebook. When you post on social media in any context and it relates to this important issue of the right to counsel, please use hashtag #right2counsel, the number 2 counsel, right2counsel. The social media is something that Ezra and I are working on, as well as maintaining the website, which is the web address is at the bottom center of the screen, rtcnationalcampaign.org. We have grown substantially the materials that are on there and continue to do so. So it's always good to keep checking back. You'll find that we've aggregated a whole variety of resources on a resource page with links to various organizations and their resources, publications. We have a news feed. We are caching the newsletters, beginning with the first newsletter that was issued at the end of February on a newsletters page. That's in the drop-down menu under news. And obviously we have an events page. We strongly encourage you, my email address is idominguez@nacdl.org, also on this slide. Strongly, strongly encourage you, if you have thoughts about news stories, you have ideas about publications or resources, you have an event that your organization is putting together, and in particular Also, we're very interested in events that are open to the public and don't have fees associated with them so that we can maximize the reach. Please send them our way, and we will get them up on the website. We will share them on the social media platforms, and anything that you can do to help take these social media platforms and the website and get more people looking at them and following them, the more reach we will have as we develop messaging through the focus groups and market survey research that's going to be done with BRS, and I look forward to working with you all, and encourage you all to reach out to me with any suggestions, any ideas, and thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivan. I just really want to reiterate what he said. Please follow us on Twitter and Facebook and use our hashtag. And also, please reach out to any of us if you have any ideas or comments or concerns about this campaign. You know, we're made up of our consortium members, and so we really want this to be a collective campaign where we're all working together to promote public defense. And so with that, I'm going to conclude what we had for this hour. And I know that we're a little bit over 3 o'clock, but I also want to give everyone an opportunity to share any updates or raise any questions or concerns that you might have at this time.
Hi, Genevieve, it's Preeti. I just wanted to, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Preeti. Thank you.
Great. I just wanted to also ask everyone to please let us know if you have any updates that you'd like to present on for the next quarterly webinar. Please reach out to us, and we can get you on the agenda. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, if no one has anything else to add, I will conclude this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating.